I was asked to speak with all of you today about Kodshim, about sacrifices. And this is the first Masechet since the start of the new cycle where that's actually been a really big theme. And I know it can feel challenging or less meaningful than some of the rest of what we find as we page our way through the Talmud. So today I want to talk about faith, emunah. I want to talk about gore and blood. I want to talk about women, and I'm going to talk about making meaning. So first, faith. One of the most important things to remember about the Bavli is that it's a galus document. It's a document of the exile. When the rabbis of the Bavli argue about temple ritual, it's actually not because it was practical to them. And in Masechet Shabbat 31a, we see Rava say, when a person is brought to judgment in the next world, they're going to ask him a series of questions. And one of those questions is, Kavata Yitim Torah, did you set aside time for Torah study? And good news for me and for you is that the answer to that is yes, if you are here. Good job. But another one is, Tzipita Yeshua, did you anticipate the redemption? Did you anticipate the redemption? When the rabbis of the Talmud sat around arguing about the details of sacrifices that they had never seen with their own eyes, it's an incredible act of faith in the coming redemption, an act of faith that we carry forward as we too continue our study of Kodshim, of the laws of sacrifice. It's a belief that those laws could become relevant again for us at any moment. Okay, so now let's talk about how bloody korbanot are. Let's talk about the gore. Rav Kook wrote in Linvuchei Hador that in the messianic future, when all people are vegetarians, we will only bring menachot, we'll only bring grain offerings to Hashem. And that's lovely, obviously. But if you do not imagine a messianic future in which you don't bring your Yom Tov brisket with you, then those people need to imagine that animal sacrifice would continue. So in a world before freezers and shrink wrap, people who ate meat, which is our grandparents and great-grandparents, right? They ate meat, they had Yom Tov briskets, and they understood that the food that they were eating used to be alive, that their chicken for Shabbos bled on its way to the table, that it died so that they could eat it. And in temple times, with animal sacrifice, the animal's death would actually stand for more than just our own culinary pleasure. The sacrifice from which we would ultimately eat would endow that animal's death at the temple with holiness and with meaning as it bridged between humans and God. And now we treat animal meat as if it grew in shrink wrap on the grocery store refrigerator aisle, and that might protect our sensibilities, but ultimately it actually desensitizes us to the life that was taken, and it numbs us to the seriousness of what it means to enjoy meat at our Yom Tov table. Kodshim reminds us where our meat comes from and the kind of spiritual potential and intensity that it holds. Non-sacrificial meat is actually not just meat in the Talmudic understanding, it's cholin. It's the absence of holiness. It is profane. There's a binary condition between Kodshim and cholin, sacred and profane, and there's actually no middle ground between Kodshim and cholin. There's no neutral. When we eat cholin meat, the meat which we buy in grocery stores, which we're cooking for Yom Tov this week, we're consuming something that had the potential for great holiness, but in our times that holiness is unachievable, so it's profane, so it's cholin. And the gore, by the way, is still there. We just don't see it. The blood is spilled, but not in a way that makes it onto the altar. It just never achieves its spiritual potential. It's wasted. That's a profanity in our tradition. And next I want to talk about women. Because I think sometimes when we imagine the Beit HaMikdash, we think of it as this super masculine space. All the Kohanim are men, the whole place just full of men and blood and things that feel isolating to us. And I want to draw your attention to this amazing Gemara in Chagiga 16b. And it starts out with a midrash on this past week's parsha. The Rabbanit Israel, v'samach, speak to the children of Israel, and he should place his hands on the head of the sacrifice. That's from the beginning of Vayikra. And the midrash that the Gemara brings suggests B'nei Yisrael somkin, ve'ein b'no Yisrael somkin. The sons of Israel, men, do smicha with their hands on the head of the animal, and the daughters of Israel do not. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yishmael omrim, but Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yishmael say, B'not Yisrael somchot reshut. Women can do smicha if they choose. And then Rabbi Yossi tells the following story, and I think every woman needs to know this story as your preparation for the future redeemed times. Amar Rabbi Yossi says, Sachri Abba El Azar. Rabbi Yossi said, the sage Abba El Azar related to me the following incident. On one occasion, we had a calf brought for a peace offering. Ve'hevinuhu le'ezrat nashim, and we brought it to the women's courtyard. V'samchu alav nashim, and the women placed their hands upon it. Lo mipnei shesmicha b'nashim, we didn't do this because there's an obligation for women to do smicha, to place their hands. Ela kedei la'asot nachat ruach l'nashim, but in order to please the spirits of these women, la'asot nachat ruach l'nashim. Women were in the Beit HaMikdash and they wanted to be involved, and their desire to be involved was accommodated. The Beit HaMikdash was a place of women's spirituality and women's ritual inclusion, at least to a certain degree. So when we learn Kodshim, it's not someone else, it's not men, it's not just Kohanim, it's us. In a redeemed world, it will be us in the Ezrat Nashim of the Beit HaMikdash, waiting to be involved in the process as well. We could have been there. And lastly, I want to turn our attention to the topic of meaning making. So all of us who learned Masechet Brachot know that our daily tefillot were established to mirror the daily korbanot. And as we learned about the korbanot, we can think through what elements of our liturgy mirror the different ones. So we know that the korban tamid, about our daily sacrifices, is shachari, then musaf is for the special holiday sacrifices, and there's such a thing as a tefillat nedava, and that maybe corresponds to a korban nedava, and that would be like an extra tefillah that we can just say whenever we want to, which is a thing that exists. And when we might have brought a Thanksgiving offering or a korban toda, now maybe we'll say birkat hagomel, maybe we'll sponsor some kiddush to go along with it. And knowing how this would have worked in the temple can really enrich our practices today. And recently, I had an experience where I felt like this project of creating tefillot to mirror korbanot was actually like not fully complete yet. And that experience was childbirth. My son was born 10 months ago, and I realized that in temple times, I would have brought a korban yoledet, which is the special offering of a mother who survived childbirth. There would have been this full opportunity to ritually mark the massive change that that birth represented in my body and in my life. Today, most of our ritual after birth surrounds the new life. And with a firstborn son, that's really quite a lot of ritual. And the mother's experience and trauma and love and transformation isn't marked beyond just like a quick birkat hagomel, often recited by a mother overwhelmed and vaguely still struggling to stand upright. And I decided that really didn't feel like enough to mark the moment for me. I wanted a full-blown tefillat yoledet, the same way that we have a tefillat musaf. So I did that. I didn't look too hard to find the right words, because on Hanan, Hannah's first trip to the Mishkan after her son Samuel is born, she recites a poem. And Hannah is the inspiration for rabbinic liturgy kind of overall. So when I was inventing a new ritual and a new piece of liturgy, co-opting hers seemed just right. So for my tefillat yoledet, I recited Shirat Hana and I benched Gomel. And honestly, it was really perfect. I felt like I was doing something that was real and ancient. I was marking a moment that the Torah requires us to mark in a deep way, a moment that once upon a time would have been marked by a bird sacrifice, and today we mark with words. And I could do that because I was familiar with Kodshim. So Shkalim coming up next is all about tax collection and the Beit HaMikdash, and I hope you're able to imagine yourself into it. to come to terms with the sacrifices, to make personal meaning out of your learning, and most of all, to anticipate our redemption and the Beit HaMikdash's rebuilding speedily in our days. Chag Kasher V'Sameach, and Mazel Tov to all the Messiah.